On behalf of the Historic House and Village Tour of Tariffville, I'd like to welcome you tonight to a talk, the warm-up lap for the tour, which will be on June 2nd. So the more I follow the footsteps and history in Tariffville, the more I'm fascinated with that little village. Starting its presence for colonists anyway, there was an Indian trail that crossed the river there, and of course many colonists then followed those footsteps, and thus the village of Tariffville started up by the falls where you could cross the river. My name is Ika Scully, and I'm co-chair of the committee along with John Nagy, who's the president of the Tariffville Village Association. There are several members of that committee, including Frank Haviland, that have just been a wonderful resource in putting this tour together, and I consider myself really fortunate to have all of those resources. So that's about all we need to say. They'll tell you more about the Tariffville coverlet. If you are looking to be a docent at any one of the locations on the tour, please see me afterwards. If you're a docent, you get a free ticket, and so that should be a little enticement. And I'll turn it over to John and Frank.
Thank you. So Frank and I are a little bit of a tag team. We've done this a couple of times in one form or fashion or another. And we're both founding members of the Tariffville Village Association, which started in 2003. And so for the past 16 years, we've been enjoying each other's company and sharing our love for the village of Tariffville. So this is a great thing for us to be here tonight, and we're pleased that all of you could join us. As Ika mentioned, the first name for Tariffville was the Falls. And this is some artwork that was done for the 300th anniversary of the town of Simsbury in 1970 by Jeffrey Ashmore. And he's passed away, but his wife offered this artwork for us to use, and so we're pleased to have it. It commemorates the place where the colonists were able to cross the river without swimming, and that's Tariffville. There's some rapids there, and the river's shallow enough in some places where you could walk across even today, and or take a horse and a wagon across. Tariffville actually had more than one name. This was the name that the colonists used, and over time they harnessed the water power, and the second name for our village was...
Yeah, it was Griswold Village. There was a fellow that just over by Old St. Andrew's Church who owned a lot of property there and owned a lot of the land in the village, which was totally undeveloped, so it was not a big deal. But there was a tiny little factory that sat there that made, it bought iron rods from western Connecticut, heated them and drilled them down into skinny little wires, cut them into short lengths, stuck them into a block of wood, and sold them so you could comb and card wool. Okay, and that was the only, they had maybe 2 houses and 1 little factory, and that was it. So very, very lean beginnings.
So in addition to crossing the river and fishing, which I hadn't mentioned, and water power, which later came, some of the modern uses of the river might be this one right here.
Yes, he's doing a somersault.
Frank was instrumental in getting the kayak races restarted after many years when we had them early 70s, and then for a long time we didn't have them, and Frank was instrumental in getting them restarted. This is a map from 1730, which I've always found interesting. And I love maps. This one shows Talcott Mountain here, and Simsbury on this side of the mountain, and Bloomfield and Windsor on the other side of the mountain. And this little road here, or path, is Mountain Road in Tariffville. And Mountain Road came down what later became Main Street. This would be Main Street in Tariffville. And then here's the river crossing that I mentioned, where you could still today walk across the river. It's at the end of Main Street, where Main Street Extension comes in. Right now, when you would see that spot, you would see the remains of a bridge, just some bridge abutments in that spot. This squiggly line going across here is the Farmington River, and this little loop here is Pickerel Cove, which even today is a good place to catch pickerel. And it's down in across the river from Tariffville Park. And if you see on this little map, you see the word The Falls, and that was, as we say, the first name of this section of town. And then you see this fellow here, his name was Griswold, and he owned a large portion of the area. So this is a fascinating map if you like maps, and I do, so here we go. Now this is another fascinating piece of artwork. John Warner Barber in 1836 finished compiling or published a book of history and illustrations of every town in Connecticut. And this illustration of Tariffville is particularly interesting because it shows the village as it appeared in 1836. Now, most of this was burned in a fire in what year?
1867.
1867. Most of this was burned down, but some of it remains. These houses here remain, and they're on Red Hill Road. So if you were to be coming down this area here, which is now Elm Street, if you're coming over from Simsbury and coming down Elm Street, as you near the bottom on the left, you'll see a row of houses that look like this, but they're actually on Elm Street, which is down below. But up above Elm Street is Red Hill Road. So you'll see two rows of houses which are more or less identical, except that the ones on Elm Street have the basement showing because of the elevation. And there's a house on the tour, which is Terry Sauls' house. Terry, did I see you? Oh, there's Terry. Yeah. There's a house on the tour, which is not visible on the map, but would have been here in 1825 when the factory was founded. And it would be basically this same style of worker housing. So I find that interesting that these houses, which were probably built in 1825, still exist, and that we'll be able to visit one on Tunxus Place on our tour. And Frank will tell you a little bit about how Tariffville got started.
Yeah, well, you see the mill building in the background with the cupola on the top. The little factory that I talked about before was put out of business because somebody in Hartford invented a machine that could put the wires into the card automatically. And so he was selling all of carding tools much cheaper than this guy did. So he went out of business, but he was still looking for something to do. Well, at the same time, a fellow showed up in town who knew all about using water power to make things. And they said, oh, we got a good engineer. What else do we need? They needed some money. Well, they found a fellow named Ellsworth, who was actually a nephew of Oliver Ellsworth, the big shot, who was like involved in everything back those time and very wealthy. So the three of them got together and built this thing. And the reason that they did it was because in 1824, the U.S. government increased the tariff on imported wool and woolen goods to 33%, which meant that in the U.S., you get a little wiggle room here. The factories in England were gigantic. They had 1,000 or 1,500 people working in them. And these guys didn't have anything near that. But suddenly there's this big tariff, plus you got a boat ride from England, plus you probably got 2 or 3 middlemen along the way. So they were able to build woolen carpeting at a reasonable price. But they didn't know how to use the water power to do anything more than card the wool and spin it into threads. The weaving was done by hand looms with a bunch of cottage weavers from Scotland. They put them on a boat and brought them over here, put them in a house, and they gathered them all in that building and let them go at their hand looms as if they were just in rows. Worked great for a while.
So this was actually the start of the carpet industry in the United States. It started right here in Tariffville.
And it's also how the town got its name. The factory they called the Tariff Manufacturing Company because they were so amazed that this tax law had suddenly made their business possible. And then they named the town Tariffville. A more typical thing would be to name the town after the guy that put up the money, Ellsworth. And you'll see all over Connecticut are all these towns with somebody's name and a ville on the end, and those were typically the wealthy guy that built the mill.
So there must have been some humor involved in naming it Tariffville. The suggestion was made that we should go back to calling it the Falls, but then it wouldn't be Tariffville.
Now, how did you two get in front of the picture there?
Yeah, well, we've been reborn. So.
That's the ultimate selfie.
Yeah.
The historic selfie, because John Barber put himself in all of these pictures. Yeah.
Okay. So this is Terry's house, 11 Tunxus Place, and that will be on the tour. And down below on Tunxus Road is a cute little cottage, one of 4, and the suggestion had been that these might be some of the supervisors' houses at the mill. The workers' housing were all duplexes, up and down, side by side. And so these little cottages were single-family homes and likely supervisors for the mill. Here's a map that I spent hours looking at, and if you were standing down at the mill, this is the mill building that we know today. If you're standing down here with your, say in this area, with your back to the mill, your back to the river, to your left would be Elm Street. This is Elm Street here. And these are the worker housings that I mentioned on Elm Street, which still exist. And this is Red Hill Road above Elm Street and curves around towards Main Street. These buildings over here are gone. And this is Mountain Road, which still exists. There was a Catholic church up here, which no longer exists, but the first Catholic church in town was on Mountain Road. Coming up here, you'll see Main Street. A couple of these houses still exist on Main Street, 41 Main Street in particular. Here's the crossing where people would either walk across the river, but by 1850 they actually had a bridge and a dam, and the dam diverted water to the canal, and this is the canal that fed the factory for the water power. This is Winthrop Street coming up here, and Center Street. Church Street wasn't built yet. the Trinity Episcopal Church was proposed to be built on Center Street, but was eventually built up here on Church Street. There's a little schoolhouse here which was proposed. Ultimately, it also got built on Church Street. There are 3 one-room schoolhouses on this map, and I have it up here, and I actually have this map for sale if you wanted your own copy to spend a lot of time on. I have them for sale tonight for $10. Every house or every structure that the mill owned was listed on the legend here on both sides, numbered and listed as to what the purpose of it was. And in addition to the bridge at the end of Main Street, there was another bridge at the end of Tunks's Road, and both these bridges were eventually replaced by iron bridges, and both washed out in the 1955 flood. And all you see today are the remaining abutments in both areas, because Route 189 was built through here, this section, and it replaced those. The Route 189 replaced those 2 bridges in 1955. Well, I could talk all day about this map. Oh, and here's the railroad station. If you want to say a little bit about the railroad, Frank.
Well, the railroad originally was just going up and down along the canal, on the canal line in Simsbury. But when the factory was really booming, they rebuilt in 1840. They finally got an engineer who knew how to use the river water to actually weave carpeting. And they said, oh boy. So they built a big mill. And that's the surviving building today, that big brick building. And they got the water power to do that. And all of a sudden they were making a lot of carpet, so much so that the Canal Line Railway built an extension that just went from Hop Meadow Street over to the mill and stopped. And its only purpose was to pick up carpeting and take it away and sell it in New York and New Haven and wherever else they could take it to. But because the railroad was there, the local farmers in the region would come to the town and put things on the train to send for their produce. So all of a sudden they had a way to market their stuff, not selling it to their next door neighbor. Well, then that brought another fellow into town who decided they ought to have a hardware store there so he could sell all kinds of things to the farmers, shovels and hooks and rakes and things. And so that's how some of the houses in the village got put together.
Just a quick question, the canal, kind of lose it there. Does it go tunneled to the mill?
It goes into the basement of the mill through an archway.
Okay.
Which you can still see from the inside of the mill.
Okay.
And then it comes out through another archway, but 9 feet lower.
So there was an open canal along here, and I'm not sure if it was open all the way.
Yeah, that's the part I'm looking at. Whether
you can see it here. It's colored in blue. It's open water all the way around until you get into the building.
Yeah, okay.
And then it goes through the building and comes back out, open water, back to the river. And this is its reservoir.
So, so let me just point out 2 more things. This is Tunks's Road here, and these are the 4 cottages, one of which we'll see. And this is Tunks's Place up here, and I believe that this is Terry's house, 11 Tunks's Place.
I'd like to interject. We found an 1872 Hartford Courant article that talks about Tariffville, but also talks about these houses, the 4 and then the worker houses, and how the breeze off the water just is so refreshing.
Yeah.
And oh dear, I think that's my phone.
Oh no!
But it's so nice to sit there standing overlooking the river and feel those same breezes from 1872. It's just the same.
The breezes are still blowing.
Yeah, they feel there.
We're running slow.
Yeah, we're a little slow, yeah. Oh, one little fun fact. There's a little island in the river here, across from the factory, and on the map it's called Griswold Island. So, as far as I know, that name has not changed. So there is, the Griswold name is still in the village. This is a very influential house in the village. This is the Mitchelson house at 48 Elm Street. And we have Sherry Landerman, the owner here, and her porch will be on the tour. You can stop and visit her house on the day. And Frank will talk a little bit about the Mitchelson family.
Yeah, well, the Mitchelsons were farmers and owned a lot of the land in the village. And the son, Ariel Mitchelson Jr., was approached by all the tobacco farmers were growing the ground type tobacco, the big things you see on the ground. There was no shade tobacco. The Department of Agriculture in the federal government had sent some people to Sumatra to figure out, what's going on, and they suddenly come up with the idea if you did it under a tent, you might be able to duplicate the climate that they have in Sumatra and grow some really good tobacco for cigars. But farmers are very conservative. They don't want to do anything their grandfather didn't do. And so they had no luck at all trying to do anything until finally Ariel Mitchelson said, okay, in what's now the Heights, he said, I'll try it. And so he bought some poles and he bought some shit, the stuff on top. And when he got his first crop, the Secretary of Agriculture and a bunch of the big shots from Washington all came up on the train to be there and celebrate this whole thing. And the whole thing caught on really quickly because he had way better stuff and way higher prices and way better yield because the netting protected it from sun bleaching and also protected it from some kinds of light hail. Wouldn't protect it from major hail, but it was a home run. And so it spread like crazy, and as you know, the shade-grown tobacco was what filled up the whole Connecticut River Valley for the next 100 years.
So, Mitchelson owned a lot of land in town, including the whole Heights. And I've seen some pictures of the Heights when it was all planted with tobacco and covered with netting. And he also owned the, what we call the Willow Arms. That was a dairy farm that he had. And he gave the land for Trinity Church, and like I said, he owned a lot of property in town. A very successful farmer and influential guy. This is another house of that era. It's on Main Street. It's not a house we'll be able to visit on the inside, but from the outside it was notable as a classic example of a Greek Revival house. The state historian, when he did the inventory of historic houses in Tariffville, made note of this particular house, which is next door to the Village Auto.
If you look on the picture just to the right, you can see a triangular piece of a roof from a house next door. That was his father's home. His father was the guy that opened the hardware store to sell things to the farmers. By the time his son took over the business, he was able to build a much nicer house. So they were very successful.
This is a cute little house across the street from Trinity Church, and it's on, on Church Street, 20 Church Street. It's called a Carpenter Gothic style cottage, and Mitchelson built this house for family members and several other similar houses. I like to refer to them as gingerbread houses, but the actual name is Carpenter Gothic. And there are several scattered around town on Winthrop Street, Church Street, and Elm Street. Frank, you want to say a little something about Carpenter Gothic?
Yeah, they're really called Carpenter Gothic. You see how the windows are shaped on the top, like a triangular shape like that? That's a classic
Gothic detail.
arch, a Gothic arch. you build out of stone to build a cathedral or a castle, and you want a window or two, you have to do something to get the weight of the walls to go around the hole without collapsing it all. And so they have to do either a Roman arch or a Gothic arch or some other kind of an arch. Well, when you're building out of wood, you don't need any of that. The roof isn't going to come down. It's not very heavy. But it was a style. It became very popular in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s. And you'll see later that the St. Bernard's Church, which was built in 1895, also has the same kind of carpenter Gothic windows. It was made out of wood, but they built it as if it was made out of stone.
So this house will be on the tour. You'll be able to go through it and see what it looks like. It has some cute little features on the inside as well as the outside.
Is this the house that has a weird mummy?
No, the mummy is over. The mummy's over on Winthrop Street. We won't be visiting Mummy, but you can wave to her.
Okay, still there.
I believe she's still there. Yeah, next to the school. You know,
Right.
wave to the school children. Now this is an interesting little house. It's not on the tour for visiting the inside, but it's definitely something you might want to see. It's over on Center Street, and it's the only brownstone residence in town. The Ketchin family, or some Ketchin family members, lived in this house at one time. We think they probably built it. And the Ketchins were, in Tariffville, the Ketchins were famous for building almost all of the brownstone buildings in Simsbury. The town hall, the Methodist church, the Ensign house, a lot of the Ensign Bickford buildings. They had their own quarry on Quarry Road, and they were very, very successful brownstone builders in Brownstone. We know they lived in this house at one time. We think they probably built it. We think it's probably the monument shop. They also had, before they got into building large structures, they built monuments for, you know, funeral monuments. And they also dug foundations. A lot of the foundations in Tariffville, when they got started, that's what they were doing. They were digging home foundations made out of fieldstone or whatever stone that they had on hand. They do talk about in the Ketchin journals, they do talk about having a monument shop and installing Grandpa upstairs and having the showroom downstairs and presumably the workshop in the back. And they're responsible for a lot of the monuments in Tariffville Cemetery. Yes.
So Trinity Church is a brownstone structure,
Yes.
but
It's the one they didn't build.
it's the one they didn't build, but it's from Portland. So did they get the stone from Portland there on the train?
Most likely. Portland was building like crazy in New York City. That was their big market. So they were cutting stone in Portland, putting it on a train and sending it to Manhattan to build row after row after row after row after row of homes. And the Trinity Church was designed by an architect who was well known nationally. So he would have known the people in the business of building and cutting things from Portland. So he probably hired a builder, and the builder said, well, I always get my stone in Portland.
So I'm guessing that it came by train because the first train came to Tariffville and from the canal line, came over by Walcott Road and ended at the factory. But then later it was extended to Hartford. So when Trinity Church was built in 1872, the stone could have come by train. We have a Trinity historian here tonight that might want to answer that question. Mel Smith, do you know how they got the brownstone from Portland?
Other than the fact that it cost $800 for the basement for foundation, I do not know how they got the stone up there, other than it was from Portland.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Is that Connecticut or Maine?
Yeah, that's Connecticut.
Portland, across from Middletown,
Middletown.
where the quarries are.
I know where Portland is.
Yeah,
Middletown.
very good. So I might add that Trinity Church, while we're on the subject, was built in 1872. And that was right after the Civil War. And both the Ketchin, the father, and Ketchin, the son, were wounded in that war. And actually not really recovered until after or around the time that Trinity Church was built. It's possible that either one of them worked on the project, but they didn't have their the heyday of their business was closer to the end of the century rather than 1872. Their heydays was the 80s, the 90s, and into the 20th century. This is an interesting story. As I mentioned on the 1850 map, there's 3 one-room schoolhouses on that map and a proposed 4th one. This is the 4th one. It was proposed and on the map in 1850, but it wasn't built till 1865. And it combined the 3 one-room schoolhouses into one large schoolhouse, which was 4 classrooms on 2 floors. It was modern for its time. This photo is towards the end of its life. It was built in 1865 and taken down in 1925 when the current Tariffville school was built. But at the time it was it had its own furnace. It was one of 13 district schools in Simsbury. It was one of 2 with a furnace. It was one of the larger ones for the town of Simsbury. Tariffville was a pretty populated place and a pretty happening place in the middle 1800s. Simsbury was more rural and Tariffville was more concentrated population.
So not quite a KETCHIN foundation, or?
Well, it
Could have
looks
been,
like
yeah.
brownstone.
Looks like brownstone.
Yeah, it looks like brownstone.
John, can I add, I was told that the Tariffville School was the first school in the whole state to have a library.
Inside, yes, and that was this one.
It was mentioned
Yep.
that I guess when the school was inspected by the state educational board or whatever, they mentioned that it was among the first that they had seen, if not the first. And the library probably consisted of what we would call today the Encyclopedia Britannica, maybe 20 volumes of something. That was the library. But nevertheless, it was one of the first.
John, was that located where the school is now? Same
Oh, yeah, good point.
question, I don't know.
No.
Everybody, my sister Mary.
Oh, hi.
I just found out about this presentation.
No, it was next door to the fire station. That green lawn that's next to the fire station as it goes to Winthrop Street, that's where it was.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And the foundation's not there anymore.
it's gone,
Right.
yeah.
Everything's
Yeah, it's gone.
Just grass.
Frankie, if you'd like to speak to
Yeah, this is a couple of days after the big fire of 1867. There was a water-powered carding mill that would comb all of the raw wool and straighten it all out so you could then twist it into yarn. And apparently a speck of something, a stone, a piece of whatever, they didn't know, got in the way, and the machine hit it so hard and got it so hot, it set fire to the open wall, just puffy wool. And they didn't notice it at first because it happened in the middle of the night. And eventually the local watchman saw what was going on, but the town didn't have a fire department and they didn't have anything else. And so the fire department came from Hartford like the next morning. And so it was a total loss. They burned nearly all of the mill buildings and a lot of the home buildings and tenements. And it was a mess. This whole foreground you can see in here was all tenements, and there's not even anything left. But what you can see that's left is a little bit of the front wall of the mill and part of the rear wall or the side wall of the mill. And those survived, and they're still there. When they rebuilt the mill, First of all, they had all the bricks. They didn't go anywhere with the fire. They just fell on the ground. So they were able to put it back together. They still had a foundation because that didn't burn in the fire, but they lost everything else.
So these are the walls right here that
Right.
Frank's talking about, and they exist today. And I should mention we have Steve Stang here. Where's Steve? There he is.
Yeah.
Steve, one of the owners of the mill here today, and
And so that's Main Street going up there to the left?
this is
That's
Main
Street,
Main
yeah.
Street, yeah. And this building still exists. This is 41 Main. There was a building next to it, 45 Main, which burned down. This is 41 Main.
Is that Marco's still now, or no?
It's hard to say what's up here,
Doesn't
but
quite look-
that's the
yeah.
location of Marco's.
And
This
Cracker
is Tungus Road right here.
going
and-
to Terry's house.
Yeah, going to Terry's house, and Route 189 comes through here now, so none of this stuff exists, but Route 189 comes down through here. But this is Main Street going on.
John, is the roof on Main Street, the furthest roof that's kind of facing towards us, do you think that's the Presbyterian Church, the one on the right?
Oh, on the right?
Right there. Do you think
Well,
that's the Presbyterian Church?
I don't know. What Mel's referring to is there was a Presbyterian church between
Oh.
the Cracker Barrel
Right.
and Marco's Restaurant, and that church was bought by Trinity Church when Trinity came. Trinity was established by Old St. Andrews. That's where they met when they bought the old Presbyterian church. I do not know if that's the building,
Yeah,
although
it-
it's about in the right location.
Yeah, and the other part was that the Presbyterian Church was still there as a physical building until 1870 when the railroad bought it and tore it down. But by that time, Trinity Church had already bought it. And so I think Trinity Church bought it for something like $1,500, and the railroad bought it back from them for something like $25,000. So they were very happy. That's probably when they decided to build a brick church on Church Street.
Because they needed to send their railroad right through it, right?
Yeah, they wanted to expand the railroad to go to Hartford. Because all it had, you can almost see it on the map, there's some dark stuff in front of the mill. That was the dead end of the rail line. It just went to there to pick up things from the mill.
Now, the Presbyterian Church exists on this 1850 map, if you want to look at it in a little more detail.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Just wondered if you could put the pointer on, where did you say 41 Main is on the left?
Right here.
The second building, or is that?
Yeah, this was the duplicate. This was 45 Main, and it burned down, and 41 still exists. But 41 had a duplicate building, and it was
So
45.
If you're turning left from Route 189 onto
Yeah.
Main Street,
Mm-hmm.
first you have what number? 1 Main Street?
No, 45 on the left.
It starts at the other
The
end.
package store, the current package store is 45 Main Street. And right attached to the package store is 41. So the 41 is the tall building, 45 is this one-story building. But there
Yes,
was
that's what I was thinking it
yeah.
was, but I wasn't sure. And
Yeah.
did it have a storefront?
yeah, it was a
At that
duplicate, exact
time?
duplicate, yeah.
I know it had a storefront.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is the current factory, what it looked like when the railroad was running in front of the building.
Wow. Right, it was elevated. You'd think it was on
Yeah.
the ground, but it's elevated.
Right, yeah, well, railroads don't like to climb hills. So they dig a trench through a small hill and they build a trestle over a valley, and because otherwise you need engines that are way too big. They just want an engine that's a little bit bigger than all they need to pull all the box cars up and over the hill. So they have very gradual things. So this came out from behind the Cracker Barrel, swung around, and then went down into Bloomfield through what's now 189. That whole pathway is missing now.
So the 189 right-of-way was actually the railroad right-of-way, and it was lowered it was when they built 189, they had to do a lot of blasting, and all that rubble, all that rock that they blasted out of there, they filled in everything down to the back and to the left of the mill. That whole area was where they put all the rubble. So Steve Stang did a nice job planting beautiful grass down there, and I know you put a lot of fill in there, but underneath that is a whole lot of trap rock, and right now it's a beautiful park. This is an interesting thing. If you're down in Tariffville Park, you can see some old brownstone bridge abutments where the train track used to go up to East Granby. And those bridge abutments still exist. You can see them if you go down in the park, and you can actually see them from the Main Street extension if you look down towards the park. Here's the old railroad station, which is on the would have been on the Main Street extension. This would be if you're going down the Main Street extension today and you were going down to Tariffville Park, that's the turn you would make down to Tariffville Park.
And that's the spur that went over those trestles he just showed you in the last slide.
And this area here is the Hayes Landing, the condominiums at Hayes Landing.
Before they were condominiums, it was...
Yeah, it used to be a tobacco barracks when I was a kid in the 60s. They would bring up girls from Florida for the summer, and they would pick tobacco, or not pick tobacco, they would sow tobacco, sow tobacco, and that was where they lived. I don't know how far back it goes as a tobacco barracks, but it was a tobacco barracks in the 60s. And here's the famous Trinity Church. Quite a beautiful brownstone structure. On the tour, Mel Smith will be in charge of that tour, and there'll be a tea. We're having a tea on the Trinity tour.
Yeah. You see the Gothic window, built out of stone. They really had to do that. That was not just decor. That was essential.
And here's the mill, which gives the town its name, and was rebuilt in 1874 and exists today largely the same, with a lot of new businesses. How many businesses do you have in there, Steve?
28.
28 businesses. Yeah, isn't that something? And quite a variety too. Quite a variety of businesses.
Yeah, calling some of them businesses is a stretch.
Now here's my old house. I lived here for 30 years, Red Hill Road. Now most of the houses on Red Hill Road were worker housing, duplexes. And in fact, on the 1850 map, that's what you'll see. You'll see a duplex. I don't know what happened to that house. I don't know if it burned or was taken down or what happened, but somebody took the opportunity to build a nice little Italianate house. On the historical inventory of Tariffville, it was mentioned that one of the features of the Italianate style was the large veranda, which I've always appreciated, the front porch there, and also the cross gable construction. So you have a gable end on all four sides, and that apparently was part of the Italianate style, which later became the Victorian style. So this house is on the tour. You'll get to see it. It was likely built as a single family, but over time it was converted to a three-family because it was probably too big for your average Tariffville family. And so now it's a three-family at this time, but you will get to go through it. Want to talk about the record?
Yeah, this was in 1878 in January. There was a religious revival somewhere in downtown Hartford, and a lot of the people who lived west of Hartford got on the train to go home. So it's 10 o'clock at night in January, it's freezing cold. They come in through Tariffville and they start across the Farmington River, and it had 2 locomotives pulling a string of cars because there's some hills in further west in Connecticut where it had to do some extra climbing. And it fell through. They collapsed the trestle across the river, and you can see what some of the cars went in. It was the first couple of cars, and both locomotives fell into the river. 13 people died, 70 people were injured. But the most interesting part about it is the back of the train was fine, and so one of the employees of the railroad got out of the train, ran back to Tariffville to the center where the train station had a telegraph key. And they sent a telegraph message back to the Hartford Railroad station, said, "Holy smoke, send help, the train crashed, blah, 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 blah." Nobody had phones back then. This is telegram, this is 1878. So the train station sent the kid who delivered telegrams to run to the drugstore in Hartford. Drugstores and doctors had phones. They were the only ones then. So the drugstore then called all the doctors on his phone list and said, "Go to the train station, they're putting together a train." And they called somebody else and got a whole bunch of medical supplies and piled them all onto the train, and off they went. Actually, one of the competitor railroads also sent a train with doctors and equipment like a few hours later on the same track. So in a way, it was the first 911 call in America. 1878.
So one of the stops on the tour is Marco's Restaurant, which has a lot of historic picture plaques in their restaurant, and on the very back wall is a picture of the one of the engines that came to the rescue. So if you're interested in trains, that's a really cool picture.
So when was that train station built in Tariffville?
Train station?
Yeah, in other words-
1870.
Okay, but
Well, there was two.
See?
There was two. There was one in 1850 on the 1850 map, and then there was a second one over time. I'm not
Yeah,
sure when
well-
the second one
Well,
was
but the
built.
1851 was just for freight. They would go to the mill, pick up stuff, and so they needed to have an office
was that the
building.
one that came in from the west?
But there was no
Yes.
there was no real
Yeah.
passenger traffic of any
That just came in
consequence.
from the west, but
In
this
18
other one-
right, in 1870, they extended to Hartford, and now they had a line that went from downtown Hartford all the way to the Hudson River. And so that- they built-
It went to the left to Simsbury, the
Yeah.
train went to
Right.
Simsbury, and went to the right up into Granby?
Yes.
Your East Granby?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Because was it ever say, with that major hub, that Tariffville was once going to be the capital of Connecticut? I mean, it was a rumor, I don't know if it was, is that,
Well, at the time that happened, Hartford and New Haven took turns being the state capital. And so there was a lot of train traffic because this train came up from New Haven and went to Hartford. And so they go back and forth and back and forth. I think it was some wag who said, "Why don't we make Tariffville the capital? We don't have to do all this blasted train riding." So, but I don't think it was serious
Yeah, it was
because
never- okay.
there was not enough superstructure there.
Well, there are some of us who believe that Tariffville is the center of the universe. And here is a perfect example why it should be, because I would love it if this building still existed, but this is the Bartlett Tower. Bartlett built a couple towers on Talcott Mountain, one of them in Tariffville. And the first tower was built in 1889, and then it was sold to Antoinette Eno Wood. Did I get that right? In 1898, and she used it as a retreat lodge, a private retreat lodge. Anyway, it burned down in the 1930s, but it's quite a memory. And there is a large chimney, which is the remains of this tower, and it also had some very famous visitors, including Mark Twain. It was a popular thing to do to take the train out from Hartford for the day and either hike up to this tower or take a carriage up to the tower and have it be a, you know, a family outing. So
Well, it was built by Bartlett specifically as a commercial venture. And it had a dance floor, it had a bowling alley, it had food service, it had no alcohol. They made a big point about that. And when you went up onto the top, which was not as elaborate as, you know, this is after Antoinette converted it into a thing and tore down all the other things. But you could go up onto that tower, it's 70 feet above the ground. And already the ground is like 600 feet above sea level. And they had telescopes and things up there that you could look at, and you could see all around from many, many miles. And it was a big to-do. 50 cents, you could get a ticket in the Hartford station, and it would ride all the way up, and you can get on a wagon, they take you all the way up to the top.
still a favorite place to hike, but no tower. Now this is Main Street today as it exists. The two large structures there, one the Cracker Barrel and the other Marco's, they're both around 1890 construction. And here's what the Cracker Barrel looked like in the day. The building was referred to as the BOLES block. I'm not sure exactly what that refers to, but that was the name it had. And it had a lot of different uses, including a cigar manufacturing, a post office, grocery store, bar, and
Ice cream shop.
Ice cream shops. And today it's the Cracker Barrel pub.
Right. David was born there or grew up there?
I was born up on the second floor. My grandfather came in 1910 and had Farrell's Market on the left and the Avion on the right. He owned the whole building. And one of the things I wanted, the Farrell household is that house that has the mannequin in it.
Oh, is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, but she is a goddess overlooking Tariffville. This whole thing about some eerie thing.
She's not a mummy?
Because Tariffville is such a beautiful place. It's a goddess overlooking, blessing Tariffville. So, but that was the Farrell household. It was the first one that had a television too, with a little screen this big.
Now, did you install the goddess, or who installed the goddess?
That came after it was sold by the.
Put it
up there, but that's the story that we tell because we had such good times at that. And the Polish American home was across the street, which had weddings that were just parties that were awesome.
And I understand there was a Boy Scout hall in your day.
The Boy Scouts used my father was the scoutmaster. They used the firehouse for that.
Oh, okay. But did you tell me there was a hall on the second floor of this building? Oh, no.
I was born in Hartford Hospital, but they brought me home to the second floor.
Oh, you lived on the second floor?
Yeah,
okay.
My grandfather owned it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very nice. Well, getting back to Marco's property, this property is significant on the Tariffville Historic Survey as being one of the few commercial Queen Anne style buildings in the state. So it's got some unique design features there. And here's St. Bernard's, the third Catholic church in Tariffville. First one was on Mountain Road. I understand it was taken down, and then the second one was in Tariffville, or in St. Bernard Cemetery, and I believe that one may have burned down, and then this one was built. Unfortunately, it closed recently, and it's looking for a buyer, so if you're interested in a church, it's in beautiful condition, inside and out.
Notice the Carpenter Gothic windows. This is a wooden building. It's not stone. They don't have to build them that way, but that was the style.
Yeah, and it's very pleasing to the eye, and you could see how somebody would want to reproduce it if they could. Yeah. Now there's an interesting story. So this is the firehouse before it became a firehouse. KETCHIN employed a lot of masons, you know, because he was in the stone business. And he actually built this building as a tobacco warehouse. So how did Ketchin get in the tobacco business? Well, he had masons and he didn't have any work for them in the wintertime. And so he would lose all his masons and then have to rehire them and retrain them and so forth every year. So he went into business with Hayes in tobacco, and so this was a combination tobacco warehouse and sorting and packing facility. So that was how he kept his masons busy in the wintertime, was packing tobacco. And then this house, this structure later.
Oh, just don't leave it yet. See all that flat, angled stuff? That's glass. That gives them light to do all the tobacco sorting. You've got to be able to see what they're doing and look for brown spots or green spots or whatever you got to do when you're doing tobacco things. And that was what gave them the light to work during the day.
This spire in the back is from Trinity Church. It's not part of the tobacco warehouse. The tobacco warehouse had a flat roof, which I understand was kind of leaky, Wally.
Right up until 1991.
So at some point, a couple interesting things about this building. It was a fireproof building, so that was good for a tobacco warehouse. The building would not burn down. There were a lot of things burned down, you know, in days gone by. So this one was built. It was also one of the first times they used reinforced concrete. In fact, the guys who put the floors in were afraid to, once they built these floors for the first time, the reinforced concrete floors, they were afraid to walk under them because they weren't sure of the technology.
John, could I add one thing?
Yeah.
It was the worst thing you said. As I understand it, Ketchin would have to bring over masons from Europe who were very good with granite and marble, but not sandstone. Sandstone has a grain, it's much softer, so it would take a full building season to get them trained in doing sandstone masonry, at which point the building season ended and they would go do other stuff, and he had to bring them over again and train. It was very expensive. So this was a financial investment to keep the guys employed, which you had said, but the European stuff makes it even more expensive.
So this is the renovated building after it had been sold for use as a firehouse and then remodeled in 1991 with a peaked roof, which hopefully doesn't leak, right?
Doesn't leak?
Yeah, you get a little more mileage out of a peaked roof than you do out of a flat roof. Here is the descendant of the Tariffville District School. Like I say, that building lasted from 1865 to 1925, so this was the new school in 1925. It will be on the tour with its additions. There's been a couple of additions to it. And the mascot is still there, KIP. KIP is short for Knowledge is Power. And that's the mascot of Tariffville School. Now we come up to the gazebo on the green. So this is what I call living history. When we got together in 2003 to form the Tariffville Village Association, we wanted something to mark the spot where four areas of national recognition intersect. And so this is what we came up with. The four areas of national recognition that we identified way back when were the Metacomet Trail, which is this purple line, which has at this point become the New England National Scenic Trail. It's a federally protected trail. And it was being studied for that purpose when we got together in 2003, and at some point was designated. And now we have, in the blue, we have the Farmington River, which is federally protected wild and scenic status. Half of it was protected at one time, the other half has just been designated protected as it comes through town. The third one is this orange line. This is the East Coast Greenway, which is the Maine to Florida multi-use trail. And the fourth category is we're on the National Register of Historic Places, and that's the green. So the four areas of national recognition intersect right here at the gazebo. And so we got together with the town and proposed building this gazebo to mark that spot. And you can see that the railings look like canoe paddles, and the cutouts out here, I'll give you a little more detail over here. Here's our logo. So the girl who's hiking, she commemorates the New England National Scenic Trail. The fellow who's biking commemorates the East Coast Greenway. The fish and the canoers commemorate the wild and scenic Farmington River. And then the gazebo itself is built in an historic manner to commemorate the National Register of Historic Places. We thank Mary Murphy of Sage River Graphics for putting together this for us. And the actual gazebo was built by George Mattingly of Mattingly Construction, and he did all the cutouts, and we're quite proud of our gazebo on the green. Finally, to commemorate this event coming up on June 2nd, we've come up with the Tariffville coverlet, which you can see on the screen, and you can also see hanging on the wall over here, and has many of the iconic images of Tariffville. This coverlet is for sale. It's $50, and we'll take your order tonight, and we'll have it for you on June 2nd. So that's our program.
Yeah, some questions, yeah.
One of the things, the Florida Girls Camp was there in '55, because when the flood came, they were flooded out, and they all came to live with us. So the Florida Girls came up because we were surrounded for five days. We could not leave the town. The water was totally surrounded us. And the pump house, if you go down Elm Street, pump house is on the right. As the scouts, I worked 3 days straight putting up sandbags to keep the water from going down, because that water is where some of the purest water in Connecticut comes out of that aquifer that we pump into, and we pump to the up on top of the hill. And this gentleman will tell you about that more than I can. So it has a wonderful history. So the girls were there in 55.
In 55.
So that dorm has been there a while, and they were just called the Florida Girls.
They all stay with you.
But yes,
Yeah.
we distributed all over the town. Yeah.
That sounds like a pretty good deal for you there.
So the house that Sherry has, Hayes, A.J. Hayes, was kind of the mayor of the town. He helped get the sewer treatment plant, because the federal had a grant, and he put in money with the first place in town in Connecticut, I think, that had a sewer treatment plant. And so he kind of ran the whole town, and he was the one who got us together, and the helicopters would fly into Tariffville School, bring us water and food.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and so that was all the other little goodies. Anybody wants to know? Because it just I was raised in this beautiful place. It was really, and one of the things is, a lot of people in Simsbury wouldn't let their kids come here because we were they're naughty, we're blue collar. See, they're the wealthy, and but you know, we didn't care because it was such a rich community. Really, we just, everybody took care of them, the Scouts, the Boy Scouts. It was just this beautiful, beautiful town. You know.
They called it the other side of the tracks.
There you go. There you go. And can I bring this up too? These two beautiful women babysat me when I was a kid. So I'm talking about. Talk about it. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Well, I grew up on this side of town, and I chose to live on the other side of town because I just love the village. I mean, the hiking, the canoeing, the bicycling,
John, you might mention that they are starting from 189 to Bloomfield. Is it this year, the bike trail?
Yeah, they've started to, like I say, the East Coast Greenway comes through Tariffville, but it's on the road at this point, and we'd like to get it off the road. So the Bloomfield to Tariffville section is being built as we speak, and that will be coming down the Route 189 right away, but divided so that you have some protection there. And that's actually under construction. And then Simsbury is working hard on putting the money together and the plans together for from Route 10 to Curtis Park. And so that's two sections of it. And then the third part of the plan is to connect the two over time and have the trail along the river. It'd be a fabulous, fabulous thing for the town of Simsbury and for Tariffville. It's a dream of mine from years ago, because there's no easy way to get from Tariffville to Simsbury on foot. You have to kind of be in a car, you know. You could take a bicycle, but it's a little hairy.
At your own risk.
Yeah. So someday, and it's on the town plan to do it. So we're anticipating that it will get done. Are there any other questions?
John, who put this together for you, the cover? Who designed that for you?
So this was a group effort. The Village Association, the Board of Directors, we got together with all the images that we thought would be iconic for Tariffville. Something that, if you're from Tariffville, you would know this or you would know that. If you went to Tariffville School, you would know about Kip the Owl. The Firehouse is a gorgeous building. Everybody knows it. The churches, everybody knows the churches, the mill. The two little cottages are lesser known, but lovable. And the gazebo is living history. It's the future. I see the gazebo as the future. It was identified in 1983. The town looked at Tariffville and said, what can we do to make Tariffville a better place? And one of the things they identified was some of the assets and the recreation, nature, the river, the mountains were identified as key assets for the village. The village has all the historic assets. It's still the best, you can get the best bang for your buck in Tariffville. If you want to live in Tariffville, go to Simsbury Schools, you can buy a house for a lot less than on this side of the river, you know. So also in Tariffville, you're liable to get a house with some historic value and some charm, some historic charm. And so I think it has a lot to offer. And it's definitely, well, like I say, it's where I chose to live. And so, you know, I love it. And I'm not alone. I should add that, so when we were designing the coverlet, we kind of put together, you know, some pictures that we thought would be good. But the person who actually put it all together was Mary Murphy of Sage River Graphics. And like I say, she was instrumental in the design of the gazebo, allegorical features. And
I noticed that they're in the corners too, so that's really nice.
yes, I forgot to mention that. You'll see in the In the upper left here,
Here's the paddle, here's the,
yeah, you see the canoer here, and then over here you see the hiker, and down here you see the biker, and over here are the tobacco leaves. Yeah. So this design was Mary Murphy's, and we're quite pleased with it. So thank you, everyone.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.